fine. I'm ready when you are. All right, so the house of Omri is no more. Another name for the house of Omri for 100 points? The house of Ahab. And Ahab was a good guy or he was a bad guy? He was not so good. I mean, he makes some of these politicians look like Mary Poppins. You know what I mean? He wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a good guy. And some of these politicians today are terrible. But I mean, really horrible. Their ideologies are like probably way. They have such bad theology, such bad ideologies that like even the worst people in the Bible wouldn't even think about. The dumb things. I mean, they're just really. I mean, it's just dumb. It's just really, really stupid thinking. But even the worst people in the Bible wouldn't have that stupid of thinking. But the house of Omri is no more. And Jehu has wiped out the king of Israel and the king of Judah. Does anyone remember I'm going to call this a Bible trivia for 600. Although, these numbers are high, given that we just talked about this stuff. So for 600, the king of Israel, the name of the king of Israel. Maybe that's an 800. I don't know. I think after like the study, it should be like 400. But the king of Israel, anyone remember the king of Israel that got killed? That is the king of Judah. So that's good. That's good. This one is a little harder. Go ahead. Joram. And Joram's father was? It's easy, but it feels not so easy. Ahab, because Ahab's son dies, and then another one of Ahab's sons becomes the king. Well, anyway, Jehu has wiped out both of those kings. Who else has he assassinated? I mean, in addition to both of those guys. Who else has he put to death at this point? Jezebel. Man, I feel like you've been here. I mean, you've been here for the whole study. You guys, man, he's putting you to shame. Jezebel, an evil queen. Who else has he wiped out? Yeah. The what? The 70 sons of Ahab, and Ahab's, really all of Ahab's family members, and also Ahaziah's family members that came out. I mean, he's basically wiped out pretty much everybody he could wipe out. The purging of the house of Ahab is complete. Jehu is savage indeed. He's overthrown the town of Jezreel, and now the capital city of Samaria has capitulated. That is, they've basically surrendered. It was an unconditional surrender. They've given the throne to Jehu. They're not interested in any kind of fight with this savage military leader who is now their king. And so Jehu is sitting on the throne of Samaria. At last, Jehu found his own kingdom and wore his crown upon a troubled brow. Yes, I did just quote Conan the Destroyer, 1984, back when they made good movies, not like how Disney makes movies today. Paul, did you know that one? You didn't know it. Joe knew it. I didn't even have to finish it. Joe knew it before the service. Jehu has thus purged the political situation in Israel, but that's not enough for Jehu the barbarian. He wants to purge the religious situation as well. And that brings us to 2 Kings 10:18. 2 Kings 10:18. This is where we've left off. Then Jehu gathered all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little. By the way, did Ahab serve Baal a little? Ahab didn't serve Baal a little. He served Baal a lot. And Jezebel served Baal, and the female, that was the male fertility god, and the female fertility goddess Asherah served them a lot. Okay? Well, anyway, Ahab serves Baal a little. The idea is in comparison, like if you thought Ahab served a lot, man, I'm really going to serve Baal. Ahab served Baal a little. Jehu will serve him much. Now, summon all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers and all his priests. Let no one be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu did it in cunning, kind of like the Democrat Party and everything they're doing today. They do it in cunning, getting Trump to debate Biden way before the Democratic National Convention. They did it in cunning. But Jehu did it in cunning so that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. Now, the Baal cult has been at the forefront. Ahab's family has been ruling for really over 30 years at this point. And the Baal cult has thrived during this period. Remember, Jezebel worshipped Baal, and she led her husband Ahab into it. And so it's been the prevailing cult for ever since the beginning of Ahab's days, 874 till now, which is 841. So what's that? 64, 54, 44, like 33 years, maybe 34 years, depending on how you count the years. So this house has been in charge, and this cult has been prevailing for over 30 years, and it's evil. And the Baal worshipers, this is not like an innocent thing. They're serving a demon. Any false god is a demon. It's a construct of the human mind, really probably influenced by Satan and his minions, to get people to worship and serve something that's not the Lord. So Baal worshipers are serving a demon, but they also are participating in the sex cult. And you might remember some of what was involved in that, where they imitated the gods and they had relations with each other in effort to bring production, to bring produce, and that's, they were imitating Baal and Asherah in this terrible, terrible sex cult. Now, Baal worshipers are zealous. They're zealous for their false religion. The same thing can be said about cults today. It was like 2 days ago. I was upstairs. I don't even remember what I was doing up there, but I heard a knock on the door. And I'm like, who is knocking on my door? I don't know what time it was, 7 o'clock, something like 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock. It was like dinner time was coming. I'm about to, get some meat in my belly. Meat's for the belly and the belly for meats, Paul says. So I'm about to get some meat in my belly, and I'm hearing a knock on the door. And all of a sudden I hear a commotion going on downstairs. And Isabella comes running upstairs, and she's like, the cults are outside. They're like Jehovah's Witnesses or something. It turns out they were Mormons. Elder John and Elder Jim with their little name tags. And I just said, Isabella, I just don't have it in me. Ain't nobody got time for that. I was like, I just can't do it right now. Just let them go. Like, she didn't open, and so they got the hint because they could hear this big commotion going, what do we do? Do we open the door? Don't even open it. I don't even want to deal with the cults right now. Because the fact of the matter is, most of these people, they're not trying to get they're trying to save you. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to convince you to follow their cult. And the Mormons, this is a cult if there ever was one. So are the Jehovah's Witnesses cults. But they're zealous. They're zealous for their beliefs, and they'll go out and they're more zealous most of the time than biblical Christians are, unfortunately. Well, the same thing is true for these Baal worshipers. They're zealous for their false cult, and Jehu knows that he can use that enthusiasm to his advantage, and so he tells the people, Ahab served Baal a little, Jehu will serve him much. There's a new king in Israel. There's a new sheriff in town, and he's going to worship Baal. So giddy up. Let's celebrate. And so Jehu gathers summon all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers, and all his priests, so that no one is missing. This is the charge. Get them all. Get as many of them as you can. Every single one that you could gather, you get them together. Now, can anyone remember the last time that we saw a mass gathering of Baal prophets? I'm not talking about a handful. I'm talking about a mass gathering. I saw Abby's hand first. It was on Mount Caramel. It was on Mount Carmel. And does anyone remember how many prophets of Baal Or there were? It gets a little tricky. There's two numbers that I know you're thinking. I think I saw Sabrina's hand first. 500? Yeah, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. I'm going to come back to Abby. She's got, that's also very close. What's that? 300. No, you're getting colder.
I would say 750 for Baal, 750, and 300 for Asherah.
You're getting a little cold. If you put, it was 450 for Baal. Yeah, 450 for Baal. But we were in the ballpark here. It's not terrible. Listen, I would have 400, because there are 400 prophets of Asherah and there are 450 prophets of Baal. So yeah, there's some people there. Does anyone remember what happened to those? This one's a little easier. Numbers are hard. Does anyone remember what happened to those prophets of Baal? She does. She has to raise her hand. Anyone remember? They were slaughtered. After Elijah called down fire from heaven, they were brought to the base of the mountain and they were slaughtered. So, not the best history for mass gatherings, biblically recorded mass gatherings of Baal worshipers. So, when Jehu calls Baal worshipers together for a great sacrifice for Baal, we have a little history here where we're like, maybe we have a hint about the type of thing that might be happening here. And of course, by the end of verse 19, we see the whole thing is deception. And as one person in our church has said in the past, deception is fun. That's what they said. In the context of playing sports is what they said. But anyway, you have this mandate, whoever is missing shall not live. And if you don't show up and you worship Baal, you're going to be branded as a heretic and die. And so for Baal worshipers, there's really no choice at this point about what to do. And by the way, Baal worshipers it wouldn't be like you'd have to drag them kicking and screaming to this mass festival. They would be enthusiastic about going. They'd be enthusiastic. They'd go willingly. But Jehu doesn't want to take any chances. He wants to gather every Baal worshiper that he could find, but he did it in cunning. And the reason he did it, the motive, the purpose of it was that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. At this point in time, the new king of Israel, the new king of the north, these are not the kings of David. This is not the line of David. This is now a new dynasty. We have the dynasty of Ahab being replaced. We had the dynasty of Jeroboam was replaced. We have the dynasty of Ahab being replaced. And now we have the beginnings of the dynasty of Jehu in the north. He, at this time, has no interest in Baal worship, but he is interested in killing Baal worshipers, and he is interested in eradicating Baal worship. And so he gathers all of the Baal worshipers in verses 20 and 21. And Jehu said, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal." And they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent throughout Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And when they went into the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. And so there's a gathering of Baal worshipers, the likes of which has never been seen. Baal worshipers come from all over the place. They come from everywhere. There was not a man left who did not come, Scripture says here. That is, anyone who's anyone, and the Baal cult is there. And just like the Jews would require all Jewish males to attend the 3 pilgrim feasts a year in Jerusalem, that was kind of like what this was. All Jewish males, male Baal worshipers they're required to come. And so they travel from all over Israel to come to Samaria, to the temple of Baal. Ahab had built a temple many decades earlier, the Temple of Doom, as we're going to call it. And he also built an altar for Baal in the temple, or in a false place of worship that he had set up for the Lord. And now this so-called worship service, it's like the gala for Baal worshipers. And it must have been a massive house. Either the house itself was massive, or it's like maybe they rented out a theater or something like that, like a coliseum or something like that. It kind of reminds me of, well, even as we speak. We are 9 days from the election. That's, I'm in election mode a little bit. I'm thinking about that. And even as we speak right now, 20,000 people poured into Madison Square Garden to watch Donald Trump speak and Ramaswamy and those guys speak. So, there's a mass gathering of Trump people in Madison Square Garden right now. And, you could probably go home and watch it, or you could probably look it up online and watch it if you wanted to. So it's just to try to imagine some, years ago, it was Hillsong used to rent out Madison Square Garden. Hillsong, a terrible church. You don't even want to call it a church. It was basically a rock concert with a motivational, that's what it was. It was a rock concert with a motivational speech, and people flocked to it because they don't know the first thing about the Bible, and they thought that was like some type of God-honoring church. Meanwhile, the pastor of the church, Carl Lentz, is sleeping with different women around town and all this type of stuff, showing up in, many thousands of dollar sneakers and all this. It was just crazy stuff going on there. But, maybe it was something like that. Maybe it was a mass gathering at a place that was designated as like a temporary worship site. We just don't really know much about the site itself. But what we do know is that Jehu the merciless has these evil cultists right where he wants them. And the party's about to begin. And so he prepares these Baal worshipers for the worship service in verse 22. He said to the one who was in charge of the wardrobe, bring out garments for all the worshipers of Baal. So he brought out garments for them. It's an event for the ages for Baal worshipers. They wait in anticipation for the glorious exaltation of the storm god, who rides the clouds as his chariot and wields lightning bolts as his weapon. They're given special garments to wear, souvenir worship items. It's an event that will go down in the annals of history for Baal. It's an exclusive event in verse 23. Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab. Can we remember anything about this guy, Jehonadab? Anyone remember from last week anything about this guy, Jehonadab, the son of Rechab? Yeah, you remember. But I'm gonna give you. I've given you a few shots. I'm gonna go right behind.
And this is just one off. Didn't Jeremiah talk about the Rechabites?
Yeah.
And they were supposed to live in Jerusalem. And I'm gonna say they avoided strong drink, but that's.
Yeah. You got some stuff there. They had to go in to kind of save their hides. Yeah, they were supposed to dwell in tents and live in them, and there were religious regulations that they had to follow and stuff like that. And if we're dealing with we're in the year 841. By the time the Babylonians are coming during Jeremiah's days, you're talking 586 or so. So, that's some time. That's hundreds of years later. His family's still kind of following it. So he's an influential, his family respects his rules hundreds of years later. His descendants are still following those what we would call extra-biblical rules, So, and there are people that have extra-biblical rules even today. But this guy's zealous for the Lord. But you might also remember that he doesn't like whom? No, who? Who doesn't he like? Whom doesn't? It doesn't matter. Who doesn't he like? He doesn't like the house of Ahab. Doesn't like the house of Ahab. Why wouldn't he like the house of Ahab? Because they were not zealous for the Lord. They were zealous for Baal, right? So he doesn't like, he doesn't like Baal because he doesn't like Baal worship because it's a damnable cult, right? So that's a few things we know about this guy, Jehonadab. And Jehu is allies with this guy, and he wants his new ally to see how serious he is about his own zeal. And he wants Jehonadab to see what he's going to do with these worshipers of Baal. Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshipers of Baal, search and see that there is here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but only the worshipers of Baal. Listen, the worship service is about to begin. And some of these people have traveled far and wide to get here. Some of them might have traveled as far as 85, 90 miles, which would take days. It might take 4 or 5 days in the ancient world. And imagine what that would be like. Like if I got in my car, and I wouldn't do this, You guys know I went up to see the Northern Lights a couple weeks ago, and we were looking at the little island north of Michigan. I don't remember what the name of that little island is up there, but it kind of looks like it should be part of Wisconsin. What's that? The Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That makes sense. So we were looking at like the eastern portion of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to see it perfectly. There's a lighthouse there, though. And we're looking at it's 14 and a half hours. I don't think I could do 14 and a half hours in one day. Like my max is I've done it. I've done 17 in a day. But my max is I'm getting older. My max is kind of like 12. I feel good with 12. It's long, but I could do 12. So we ended up doing 8 hours somewhere else, and it was great. It was a perfect spot. And we saw all the lights and everything. Oh, the sky was like tie-dye. But if I got in my car, and I can't do like much more than maybe 12. Let's imagine I get in my car and I say, I'm going to drive to Venice Beach. Anyone know where Venice Beach is? Anyone know what disgusting city? It's a disgusting city with disgusting sports teams that shouldn't even exist. What city that would be? That would be the City of Angels, which is, by the way, it's a terrible city right now because of Governor Newsom and these terrible rules and terrible policies. But anyway, if I were to get in my car and I was going to drive to Venice Beach, I don't even want to say the word Los Angeles if I can help it right now. And I have specific, hostilities towards Los Angeles for a few reasons right now as a Yankee fan. But it would take me like 4 to 5 days. I would have to drive so imagine getting in your car and driving to Los Angeles. That's kind of what these guys would have to do to travel maybe 85, 90 miles. After that 12 hours a day, I'd be done. It would take me 4 days. So these guys are traveling to Samaria. And by the way, it's kind of hard to imagine that amount of distance taking that long of a time, 85, 90 miles. I mean, we go 85, 90 miles like nothing. We could do it like nothing. We could do it in a couple hours like nothing. I could fly to LA in 6 hours I could fly to Israel in 10 and a half hours over. With crosswinds, it would take 12 hours to come back. But I could go all the way over there for 10 and a half. Just imagine how much smaller. The world is so much bigger in the ancient world because of travel. And so we're seeing some devoted Baal worshipers here. And yet they see this event as a once-in-a-lifetime event. And by the way, it is a once-in-a-lifetime event, as you'll see. They couldn't be more excited than they are right now. They'll be able to tell their children and grandchildren about Jehu's great worship service in Samaria in 841 BC. Or will they? Verse 24. Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed for himself 80 men outside, and he had said, "The one who permits any of the men whom I bring into your hands to escape shall give up his life in exchange." Jehu sets 80 men outside of the temple of Baal, and he charges them to allow no one to escape. In other words, you shall not pass! Something like that. And if anyone escapes, you're going to pay life for life. Jehu means business. The worship services started inside. The priest of Baal offered a burnt offering. Everyone is as happy as can be. And then the great surprise is revealed in verse 25. Then it came about, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, and I'm assuming he in this particular case is a priest of Baal and not Jehu himself. It came about as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the royal officers, "Go in, kill them, let none of them come out." And they killed them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the royal officers threw them out and went to the inner room of the house of Baal. Jehu sends his choicest and most elite soldiers into the temple, and there he commands them to wipe out every single worshiper of Baal. And so these men go in and they start killing. By the way, imagine the scene. You're there worshiping. You're in prayer to your false god. And you hear a commotion off in the distance. Maybe you can't quite see what's going on, but you hear a commotion in the crowd, and You look and you see absolute chaos, but maybe you can't quite tell what's happening, and that chaos grows closer and closer. Paul, you might remember, you go to a Yankee game, and everybody's looking in one direction, and you're like, what's going on over there? And maybe you just missed a fight, you know what I mean? Like someone was wearing like a Pedro Martinez jersey or something like that, I don't know. And you might catch the tail end of something, right? But if it's right next to you, you could, if it's down a few aisles where something's happening, everybody's looking in this direction, you're like, well, what's going on over there? You don't know. There's a commotion, but you don't really know what the commotion is. That ever happen? Of course it happened when you put 50,000 people together and there's beer. Some of these idiots are gonna drink that beer and they're gonna act like idiots. But anyway, you're here at this worship service and you see maybe a commotion going on, and then you see armed men with swords. And they're killing everyone. And they're working through people like dominoes. And you think about how to escape, but you realize that you're doomed. That's the last minutes of these Baal worshipers. It's a scene of horror, the likes of mass shootings today. Today, has anyone ever watched a video? There was a school shooting a couple of years back, and you were able to. The cops had the what do you call them? The body cams. And there was a couple of cops, and I just remember this particular shooting. It seemed like these. I don't remember where it was. Unfortunately, there's so many of these things that end up happening. You lose track of what was what. But they were afraid to go in somewhere, and so all these cops were kind of gathered together and you have like the lady cop, she's like around the corner and she's like afraid to go around the corner, and you just hear the pops, the muffled pops. Anyone see those videos? Anyone ever watch? I mean, isn't it kind of wild? Like you're watching, doesn't your heart rate go up just watching it? Like you're like putting yourself in the scene a little bit and imagining what it would be like. I mean, just a horrible, horrible scene. You're hearing these pops off in the distance, muffled by the walls. And it doesn't take long for, I'm sure, the people to realize what's going on and recognize their plight. Here in the temple of Baal, all you hear are screams. Jehu wipes out every living person in the temple. Every worshiper of Baal dies. And that's kind of ironic, by the way, because they went in order to avoid death. Right? That was the charge. Anyone who doesn't come is going to die. And now they're going to die because they went. Jehu is savage. Indeed, he is. He absolutely is. After wiping out all the people, the soldiers desecrate and destroy all the items of worship, hoping to completely eradicate Baal worship in Israel. And I've got mixed feelings on this, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But they brought out the sacred pillars of the house of Baal and burned them. Now this is good. This is a good thing, I mean, understand eradicating Baal worship is a good thing, because these people are all going to go to hell, and they're going to lead other people to hell. That's not to say that that's something that should happen in today's economy, but we're going to talk about this in a second. We're going to talk about what the scripture said, just for a brief minute. However, what I do see Jehu doing is I do see his savagery sticking out, and how he's handling these things, and how exhaustively he wiped out the house of Ahab, and how he even wiped out portions of the house of Ahaziah. And it's undeniable that he's going to get judged for a reason. I mean, Hosea talks about his judgment for a reason, because he is savage. They brought out the sacred pillars of the house of Baal and burned them. They also broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Thus, Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel. So they burned the sacred pillars, which might be a reference to Asherah, wooden poles where they would worship a female fertility goddess. Baal is the storm god and a male fertility god, and Asherah is a female fertility goddess. And they often went hand in hand. And what made things even worse is sometimes, even in Samaria, sometimes people, that was called religious syncretism, they would actually mix the worship of the Lord with the worship of Asherah. And there's writings, ancient inscriptions found, the Lord and his Asherah. And it shows you how far people had fallen, how idolatrous people were. But anyway, Baal and Asherah, they often went hand in hand. Jehu and his men completely destroy the house of Baal, and they make it a latrine. Does anyone know, kids, you got to be under 18. Any kids know what a latrine is? Let's open it up to 40 and under. Anyone know what a latrine is? I'm going to hold off for just a second. We're going to see if we can get someone else on this. A latrine, I see a hand right here, the little guy, but I'm going to hold off on him. I don't think he knows. Do you really know? He's just raising his hand. All right, I'm going to open up to everybody. Well, let me open up to everybody. I'm going to come back to you guys at some point. What's a latrine? Joe. It's a what? Primitive bathroom. This here, they turned a place of worship into this. This is a public toilet in Ephesus. And you can imagine what happens there if you imagine hard enough. I mean, I don't think you have to imagine that hard. But, you can imagine where you might sit, and you can imagine what you might do. And so men go to the bathroom where Baal was worshipped. That's what Jehu, by the way, that's what I think of the house of Baal. I mean, honestly, I'd be perfectly fine. I would be perfectly fine. I mean, I don't know if I should say this since it's recorded, but I think they should turn like Roman Catholic churches into latrines. And I think they should turn, kingdom halls. There's a kingdom hall down the street from where I live. I mean, that should just be a public restroom. They should just make it a public restroom, and this is where you go. But anyway, that's what Jehu thinks of the temple of Baal. And for now, Baal worship is eradicated. It's eradicated in Israel. Baal worship is no more. Jehu has completely destroyed it at this point, at least in Samaria, at least with the men. And in that Old Testament economy, Jehu is actually following Scripture. You have to go all the way back to Deuteronomy 13. Here in Deuteronomy 13, I'm not going to read the whole thing. If you read verses 1 through 18, you'd see some stuff about this. You could do that later, but for the sake of time, we're just going to look at verse 5. That prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death because he has counseled rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery to seduce you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall purge the evil from among you. Maybe this is why the name The Purge was in my mind when I titled these 4 sermons. Maybe this Deuteronomy passage was somewhere in my head. But the idea is, hey, listen, if they're worshiping false gods, even if they're close family members, and they're enticing you to go to worship false gods, they shall not be spared. If you read the rest of the passage, that's what you're going to see in verses 6 through 10. Even if it's your brother or your mother's son or daughter or the wife whom you cherish or your friend who says your own soul, if they entice you secretly, saying, let's go and worship other gods, serve other gods whom neither you nor your fathers have known, of the gods of the peoples who are around you, near you or far from you, from one end of the earth to the other, like Baal. If they tell you, let's go worship Baal, let's go worship Asherah, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, and your eye shall not pity him, nor shall you spare or conceal him, but you shall surely kill him. In the original language, it reads this way. It's an interesting reading. Killing him, you shall kill him. That's kind of how it reads. Killing you shall kill him. Like you shall certainly kill him. It was serious business. It was a way to eradicate damnation out of the land of Israel, because that's what false teaching leads to, which is damnation. Now, again, things are different today because we're not under an Old Testament Israelite economy. We're not under a theocratic monarchy, that is, God being the king. As I said this morning, we're in the church age, and the church economy, we are seeing the biblical doctrine of individual soul liberty. That is, we each are going to stand before God, and we're going to answer for our whether we accept the gospel or whether we reject the gospel or whatever. People are going to stand before God and answer for their lives. But in Jehu's day, so in other words, don't go light a fire to the nearest cult center. But in Jehu's day, in that economy, they were following Scripture. That's what they were doing. In Jehu wiping out Baalism, he actually is following what the Bible said for that economy. But the question I have is Jehu wiping out Baalism because that's what Scripture said? Or is he doing it for another reason? And I'm not so sure of the answer to that. I'm not so sure of the answer to that, especially given what happens in the rest of his life and given the judgment that God calls down on his life in the book of Hosea. Nevertheless, in this passage, we do see the temporary eradication of Baal worship. And it does make me think about today and how false teaching abounds today and how we're never going to be able to eradicate all false teaching. It's never going to happen. It's always going to be out there. We're never going to be able to eradicate false religions. And we're certainly not called to do so the way Jehu did in an Old Testament economy. False teaching will never be eradicated by man, not until Jesus himself comes and rules from Jerusalem in a theocracy is what it is, a theocracy where God rules for 1,000 years, and ultimately for all eternity in the new heavens and the new earth after the final rebellion. Because, there's going to be a final rebellion. Jesus will rule for 1,000 years, and then as soon as Satan is released from the bottomless pit, people flock to him. Imagine you have 1,000 years under Christ, and people still flock. Because these lost people who are born, they're going to flock to Satan for a final rebellion, and they'll be put down, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And there, all sin will be completely eradicated. But in Jehu, we see a man who is temporarily, and that's the key word here, temporarily zealous for the Lord. Temporarily. Yet even in his zeal, he's seriously flawed. He's deceptive, he's brutal, he lacks mercy, he's savage, and he himself is not that devoted to the Lord. It looks at the moment that he's devoted to the Lord, to God, but he's not that devoted to the Lord, and we'll see that. And when I get that picture of the character of Jehu, it brings me to you and to me. And I would ask, what does your devotion to the Lord look like? Is it temporary? Is it that your greatest devotion to the Lord lies in the past? That is, there were moments where, man, you were on the top of your game. You know what I mean when I say that? I don't mean, hey, look, if I do all these good things, I'm up here and I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying there were moments in the past where you were really all in, where you were really putting time into the word of the Lord, where you were really committed to him. But now your zeal has diminished. Kind of like what we're going to see with Jehu. Now I'm giving away next week a little bit, but are you devoted to worshiping the Lord even now? Is your zeal for God permanent, or was it a little bit more temporary? Do you put him above all else? Do you have a zeal for him and his truth? Or is it a compromised walk? A temporary walk. And so when I'm bringing the life of Jehu into what it has to do with me, that's how I think of it a little bit. You need to put the Lord above all else and fervently serve him with your life, never falling away from him, never using religion for personal gain, because I think something like that's going on here too. I really do. I think Jehu's using religion for personal gain, for his political gain. But anyway, let's take our hymnals and turn to 635. We're going to close our service with a hymn. And if you're not sure you're saved, if you're not sure